you can build something very big in about 5 to 7 years. And the problem is that I think most people spend that same 5 to 7 years reliving the same 30 days over and over again, jumping from thing to thing to thing, and never actually getting the root set so that they can pay down their ignorance tax of not knowing enough. I would say there's 5 stages that most newer entrepreneurs or people who want to pursue income go through. So the first is what I call uninformed optimism. So your friend tells you about this thing they made 10 grand on, and you're like, that sounds amazing. You're uninformed, but you're optimistic, right? And so then you get into it, and then all of a sudden you get to informed pessimism. So you get in, and then you put your money in, and then it drops, and you're like, wow, this sucks. And then people are like, buy the dip, and so you're like, okay, I'm gonna put more money in. And so then you get to kind of stage 3, which is the valley of despair, where you're like, oh my God, I've lost so much money. I have no idea what's going on right now. And at stage 3, there's kind of a fork. And so either people then go, well, my other friend told me about this other thing, and they jump back to step 1 and go to uninformed optimism, and then they funnel through that loop over and over again. Now, to break through that dip, you have to basically get to stage 4, which is informed optimism. So now you understand the rules of the game, you understand the variables at play, and it's not as good as you thought it was, but you at least get it. And so from there, then you can get to achievement, which is the 5th step. But the thing is that you have to stay in that 3rd painful place, because staying in the pain is what gives you the catalyst to learn how to get out of pain. And so rather than trying to pull your parachute, it's like, I have to trudge through this so that it forces me to learn the individual skills, the individual variables that affect this outcome. And that means I might have to take 20 more lashings to finally get it. And then at that point, it starts to tick up. Yeah. And then that's when you start to become more of an expert, more of a master at something.
Yeah, and if you don't sit in that pain, you're going to keep repeating that cycle with something new. People fail not because there's some magical list nobody has. They fail because it's an obvious list nobody does.
Right, it's the obvious list. If you were trying to get in shape, you should eat less and you should move more. You already know what you're supposed to do. The question is why you aren't doing it. Besides death, all failure is psychological. The longer you think about it, the more you're like, wait, all failure is just me drawing an arbitrary line in the sand that I say anything that does not meet the standard will force me to be upset. Yeah. If I don't die, then I can keep going. Yeah. And if I don't die, then it means I can stand it. What is education? It means same condition, new behavior. If your day looks the same every single day, you have learned nothing. And so that means that if you listen to this podcast and then nothing changes about your behavior as a result, this was just entertainment, not education. Intelligence, as I define it, is rate of learning. How quickly do I change my behavior in the same condition based on some stimulus? Mm-hmm. If you've heard 10 podcasts and then you eventually change versus somebody who listens to 1 and then changes, that person is more intelligent than you are. And so I have an active control on how quickly I can learn simply by changing my behavior. It takes about 20 hours to become proficient in just about anything. It just takes people 10 years to get the first 20 hours. And that's a huge issue. That the amount of progress that you make in that first 20 hours is greater than any amount of progress that you will likely make over the remainder of your career. Because going from absolutely terrible to proficient happens so fast. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Fear typically only lives in the vague, not in the specific. We tend to catastrophize to death. So if I make this post and people laugh at me, I'll get shunned and then I'll eventually go alone and then die. Everything just goes to death. Playing it out into the specific is like, okay, well, I make this post, some people will like it and some people won't. And maybe I'll get some negative comments. If I get negative comments, I'll get more reach. So maybe that's not a terrible thing. And then that night I will have dinner. And that night I will go to bed, making it really, really specific. And then just to add one more thing on that, fear is a mile wide and an inch deep. It looks like this vast ocean of like, I'm going to drown. But as soon as you take the first step, you're like, oh, this is a puddle. Everyone talks about work-life balance, but no one talks about it over what timeline. Paul Graham said this from Y Combinator. He said, in order to make $1 million, you have to endure $1 million worth of pain. So you might be able to endure $1 million worth of pain over 40 years, or you can crunch it into 4 crazy years. And then after that, you can have whatever you want to have afterwards. If someone just listens to the episode, tomorrow will be the same for you. This was just entertainment for you. You can prove to yourself that you learned something from this podcast rather than just being entertained by this podcast by simply doing something different, taking an action. You would be so much further ahead than you were yesterday.